In this video, I'm going to explain how to work out around knee pain and when you should not train through knee pain. Let's get right into it. So the first thing is to figure out what's usually safe to actually train around. So if your knee pain feels like mild discomfort that goes away after you warm up, low level soreness that pretty much goes away within 24 to 48 hours, or some type of stiffness that's without instability or swelling, these are usually things that you can actually train around. So the second thing we need to understand is why knee pain actually shows up during our workout. So that knee pain is rarely random, and it usually has something to do with how the stress is applied to the knee and how we recover from it. So one of the first reasons is load, how load or intensity is applied. So usually this is going too heavy, too soon, and too often, or too often. And with that, it doesn't allow the knee to actually adapt and recover from the stressors that are placed on it, which will put a lot more stress on the knee. Usually it fatigues out the muscles around it a lot sooner, so then that joint takes a lot more stress. So the next thing is volume. So too much volume build up too fast can fatigue the muscles out very, very quickly. Now, when that happens, it reduces the knee joint's ability to absorb force or take on that force, and then that just causes more wear and tear on that knee joint as you go through your training after you're already fatigued from the excessive volume. So the next thing is range of motion. Limited mobility will put more stress on the knee, especially if you have limited mobility. It could be from the ankles or the hips. So that's just going to put more forces going through the knee joint than necessary because the load isn't being shared evenly as it should be when you do have that range of motion that you need. But also going into deep ranges of motion too soon when you have some type of knee irritation, because the patella takes on more stress as you go through more knee flexion. And when you do that, it can irritate an already irritated knee joint. So the next thing is tempo. So with this, fast movements rely on more momentum than actual control. So what we mean by tempo is just how quickly you move through that exercise. So if you're going down in a squat, it may be going down at a 4-second descent instead of going straight down into the bottom, kind of dive bombing into the bottom. So dive bombing will require a stretch reflex, more so momentum than anything else. And the slower eccentric or the lowering portion of that squat is going to require or allow the other supporting muscles to control that movement better, which is going to reduce the amount of stress and forces that are going to go through that knee joint. So the last thing in this category is lifestyle factors. So poor sleep, under eating, and high stress all slow recovery. And when your recovery is low, your body's ability to tolerate stress is a lot lower. So the next category we're getting into is common mistakes to avoid. So the first common mistake is pushing through sharp pain. Sharp pain is not something that you can ignore. Ignoring sharp pain can lead to something or a bigger injury down the line. So when you have some type of sharp pain, you want to get ahead of that a lot sooner than later. So the second mistake to avoid is stopping training completely. So stopping training completely is not indicated, especially if none of the red flags that we mentioned above applies to you. So what it really would do is decrease your strength overall, reduce your ability to adapt to training moving forward, and your overall conditioning, which can actually make things worse, because other than trying to get your range of motion back or trying to get your strength back, now you also have to get conditioned and used to that movement again. And your body loses that ability to actually coordinate that movement the way that it needs to keep the stress off of the knee. So stopping training completely is not something that you want to do, especially if you don't have any of the other red flags. So the third and final mistake to avoid is random exercise hopping. So especially on social media, you'll see a lot of different exercises that you can do for certain knee pain or back pain or whatever it may be. In this case, knee pain. Sometimes it can help, but in a lot of cases, it actually doesn't help because you never really figured out what the actual issue was, and you didn't give your body time to adjust and adapt. Because if the issue was something that we mentioned earlier, then what you really need is a modification for the time being from too much intensity, too much volume, too much speed of movement, and also poor lifestyle factors. So you may need to adjust those things instead of actually adding in things into your training. So the fourth category that we're getting into is what to actually modify. So the first thing we want to look at is modifying the intensity. A lot of times, this is one of the biggest drivers of pain that I've normally seen in a lot of the clients that I've worked with. So when we modify the intensity and reduce the load overall by either increasing the amount of repetitions, slowing down the movement, or changing the exercise selection, usually that irritation that the knee is experiencing at the moment usually will die down, and over time as we continue to work through that, it usually will go away. So modifying the intensity is one of the first things that we want to look at. So the next thing we want to look at is modifying the volume. So I see this a lot with my clients that whenever they have a lot of sports participation going on in their or hobbies or whatnot, and we have a lot of training volume, sometimes just reducing the amount of reps, the amount of sets, the frequency that we're training can reduce the overall fatigue that they experience, and also allow them to recover a lot faster, so that way they're not putting so much stress on that knee joint. So the next thing that we want to look at is range of motion and depth. So depth directly affects how much stress is going to be placed on that knee joint. So if you reduce the range of motion, then you'll put less stress on the knee joint. But also reducing the range of motion can allow you to lift heavier. So you have to be mindful of how much load you're putting on that bar, or how much you're actually lifting through that movement. So examples of reducing range of motion would look like in the squat pattern, instead of doing a full depth squat, maybe you do a box squat. With a single leg lunge pattern, instead of doing a split squat, maybe you do a rear footed elevated split squat. In both of those cases, reducing the range of motion required for those movements will essentially reduce the amount of stress that's going to go onto that knee joint. And the final thing is exercise selection. So the way you load the bar, or the way you load up the squat movement, the way you load up the lunge pattern, can affect how much stress is going to be placed on the knee joint. So if you load up the barbell in the front rack position, or any type of front loaded movement, it's going to place you in a position to where you're going to put more stress or have more range of motion going through that knee. So if we do a back rack position, or even a low bar position like a low bar back squat, then we're going to place more stress on the lower back and on the hips, or just take away some of that stress that's placed on that knee joint as well. So the way we load the movement, the exercise selection, can also play a huge factor in reducing the overall stress that's placed on the knee. All right, the next category that we're going to look at is what you can still train. We already talked about modifications. Now we're looking at other things that you can still do without many modifications and still get a good training effect. So the first category is upper body training. So you can still do your presses, you can still do your pulls. You can still do all those upper body movements, but you do want to be cautious of any upper body exercise that requires knee drive, such as push press movements or split jerks, things like that, that places more stress on the knee. So you have to be mindful of that. Even though you are avoiding the knee essentially, if you have heavy loaded push presses or heavy loaded split jerks or anything that requires any type of knee drive, you can still place a lot of stress on that knee joint. So the next thing that we can still train is our hip dominant movements. So our bending motions, such as our RDLs and our deadlifts. So these movements place less stress on the knee joint overall, because it doesn't require the knee to go through that range of motion that you're going to go through as if you were doing a lunge or a squat pattern. So you can perform more of these exercises in your training as you continue to allow that knee joint to heal up from the stress that's been placed on it or the irritation that's going on at the moment. So the final category is the conditioning. Now, running may not feel great, so other movements such as biking, rowing, elliptical, just low impact movements may feel better on the knee. You just have to figure out what feels good for your knee, because sometimes the seat height for the bike can change how that stress is placed on the knee. The same thing with the row. If you're going all the way in with the rower and you place more stress on that knee because of the amount of flexion that's happening at that knee joint, then that can still irritate the knee as well. So you have to think about what's going to work for your case in your scenario when it comes to the conditioning pieces that you can still do. So the final thing that we're going to go over in the final category is when to actually seek help with the knee pain, because this is really important. I'm going to go through this list here. So you should pause training or get evaluated if the knee is visibly swollen, it locks or catches, it feels unstable or gives away, you have sharp pain with basic movements like walking or stairs, you can't fully bear weight on the knee, Pain is present at rest or wakes you up at night. There was a recent fall or twist or an impact to that knee, and symptoms are getting worse week to week. So these are times that you actually want to stop training and seek help and get an evaluation of your actual knee. But if none of those red flags apply, training modifications can be a great way to keep making progress while your knee calms down. The key is knowing the difference between red flags and modifiable discomfort. And if you want help applying this to your training, book a free call by using the link in the description. Thanks again for watching.